Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of Unboxed Healing. I'm Meredith, a licensed counselor located in New Jersey and licensed in 5 states, so mostly remote work. I've been doing client-led, trauma-informed, non-pathologizing work, for this most recent portion of my career. And am really excited about creating these and embracing and engaging in these conversations with like-minded folks here on Unboxed Healing. I'll pass it over to my co-host, Lindsay.
I'm Lindsay. I am also in New Jersey. I am an LCSW. I spent my career over the last 12 years working in schools and hospitals, community settings, private practice, and then ended up in mental health tech, working with therapists who are integrating ketamine-assisted therapy into their practice. So, part of my job was helping those therapists in learning how to integrate ketamine-assisted therapy into their practice, how to educate their clients on it. Also, part of my role was educating them on how to properly assist and integrate and prep and all of those things. And now part of what I do is this. I kind of have taken it, along with Meredith, taken it beyond and hoping to talk about healing and therapy in different ways in which we were taught in school, in that kind of rigid, boxed way. And that healing is about the individual and about working collaboratively together, and everyone's different. So, yeah. And then we have our guest today, Aimee Solis, and I'll have her introduce herself and give a little bit about her background.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for having me today to talk about this. The way that you both presented Unboxed Healing is awesome, and the decolonized like thing that you're doing. So this is super cool to be sharing this space with you today and talking about the decolonization of mental health. Yeah, so my name is Aimee Solis. I am an LPC, but a better way that I feel like more like embodies what I do is I'm an intuitive healer. I integrate culture, spirituality, body-based, just whatever works for the client. I haven't always been or felt that way. Like I haven't always been that embodied myself, but I've been doing this for nearly 20 years. I'm a trained energy healer. My background is in community mental health. That's where I kind of got my start, and I worked with CPS and foster care services as well, reunifying in the reunification and foster care services as a therapeutic support. In the last 14 years, I've been in private practice. I'm in Colorado, and I am the founder of a group practice called Mindful Springs Counseling, where we have a group of about 25 to 30 practitioners, including a prescriber. And we really work to just do things a little bit differently, or a lot differently in some cases, from the traditional mental health model. So the whole practice is doing this in the community, and that is a big reason why I'm here. Is I just feel really passionate about more people and more communities finding out that healing and that mental health can look different from what they've been told or they've experienced in more of a westernized, colonized model. So yeah, thanks again for having me and talking about this.
We're so happy to have you here and have you talking about this topic. It really does embody, right? Like Unboxed Healing. The original name of this was Unboxed Healing Depathologize This, and like we had a hard time kind of you know choosing which one would be the title because both of those elements are so important. So maybe we can jump into the first learning objective here, understanding like what do we mean when we say decolonizing?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. It might be helpful to have some visual. I know some people are visual learners, so I'll throw my visual here up. So I feel like it would be helpful to just chat about what colonization is to get started so that we can move to this decolonization. And I feel like I can't talk about this topic without giving credit to somebody who's doing this work in our field. So Jennifer Mullen, there's a book called Decolonizing Therapy by Jennifer Mullen. She's PsyD, and her definition of colonization is that colonization cuts us off from our histories, our bodies, one another, and land. So we've got that there, and it operates being rooted in power and white supremacy. Our way is the right way. It silences other cultures' voices, rituals, and healing traditions in the name of resources and power. And to me, in the way that I've embodied and like not embodied colonization, but absorbed it and embodied it, right? Because like this affects us all. This isn't just about like certain people or certain cultures, but is that this is about power, control, and oppression. It's overpowering. It's overpowers people's rituals, traditions, and healing in the name of resources and power. So I thought we could start there and just chat about colonization and what that means for all of us. Like my definition is different than Jennifer's in her book, which I highly recommend. It's a lot to sit with. What about you guys?
Yeah, I would love to maybe go a little deeper with you about because you said your definition's a little bit different. So maybe we can start there and what, when you started kind of learning about this and shifting kind of your perspective and um, starting to kind of use this as your way to help your clients. And how did that start for you? And how did it resonate with you? And then now kind of what does that mean for you and how it impacts your clients and how you work with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can kind of hear it in the way I introduce myself, right? I'm like, I'm an LPC, but like, what does that mean? I'm more of an intuitive healer. The way that this came up for me, and this is hard to talk about, and it's really hard to teach. To be honest, I had a really hard time putting this together and preparing because you can learn about colonization and that this concept and idea and experience of decolonizing mental health in a top-down way. But for me, the way that this actually came up in my life, which is what you're asking, was in a bottom-up. It was I was in my own process as a healer, as a therapist of healing so that I could take my clients deeper, because we can only take our clients as deeply as we've gone. And it was about, for me, embodying my entire self. I was very, and I can still be, go into that ego space of being very perfectionistic, very top down, very cognitive. And even just the experience of there's other ways of knowing is an act of decolonization personally, and also embracing that for our clients. So I don't know if that answers your question so much as I hope so, but it was really an embodiment for me.
So yeah, that's interesting to me. So for me, when I hear that word, it means something different for me personally, right? Just like that word means something from different. And I have never heard it in the context of mental health and healing and that kind of stuff. So that's interesting for me. And I've heard of embodiment and going deeper and all of that. So that helps me in a way for sure. How has that shifted the way in which you work with your clients now? So what maybe did it look like, and kind of now that you have that insight and those experiences, and what does that look like for you and your clients?
Yeah, it looks totally different. The ways that I show up in relationship to my clients. And this is part of like the learning objectives later too, so maybe we'll cover it again, but I'm in partnership with them. I'm open, I'm trusting, and it feels so good. Like I don't have to be this expert in the room that like knows, I mean, I know my stuff, but that's because I know my stuff. You know, like, you know what I mean? Not because I know my stuff, but because like I know my stuff deeply. I've walked it, I've lived it. And that doesn't mean that I apply my exact experience to everybody else's. But what that gives me is this deep trust, this deep knowing in their process, and that they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. And I can hold that, where I think a lot of therapy models are like, oh, you got to keep them in their window of tolerance. They're just like fear, right? And like window of tolerance is an important concept, but I'm not fear-based when I come into a relationship with my clients in the healing. So I think that's the big thing. Like I hadn't defined that until this moment, but I'm not in a fear-based space. I'm just like, I'm in partnership with you and I trust your process.
Experience. So that's been a big part of like my understanding of this too, is that, you know, in Western culture, it's where you think about colonization and in America, right? Like how we got here. Oh, and it's such like good timing because Monday's, you know, Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think this is actually really good timing for this conversation. Not to go on such a huge tangent here, but I think it's really important, you know, to acknowledge that like where certain traditions, practices, like where are these things coming from that we're learning, and really acknowledging, respecting. And part of my process has had to be like giving it back, diving deeper into like my own lineage and seeing like, okay, well, like this actually came up in the last episode. Like, what is my lineage? What can I offer through my own lineage? I know Aimee, you're a brain spotting practitioner too. I'm a consultant now, and the consultant training that I went through with Maria Javid Payne, it was very focused on anti-oppression, decolonization, and yet it was uncomfortable to like look at some of that stuff and like where that shows up. I'll give it back to you now. It's just like a lot, right? It's a very loaded topic when we like, right, we could talk about it, but then when we really dive into it, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I think too, language, and I think we talked about this probably in our first episode, language and words, right? We know this as therapists, but as the three of us have done deeper work, and whether that be with psychedelics or other types of kind of bottom up healing, you know, when we hear certain words or words used in certain contexts, it can be hard to kind of either define or make somebody uncomfortable, or, you know, a word that means something to you might mean something different to somebody else. And so, you know, for me, this is something, colonization and decolonizing is something that means something very different for me than it might mean for you. And I'm sure, and I don't know, Aimee, if this happens when you I don't know if you explain this concept to your clients, or maybe if you're teaching or talking to other professionals. But has that ever come up where the words kind of make others kind of sit with that uncomfortableness, and then also opens that conversation for what it means for them?
Or
Kind of,
having uncomfortable.
is it more just that's your framework, or is that something that you use during your psychoeducation and working with other practitioners and things like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think it just goes back to, it's just how I show up. So I don't do a lot of pre-education with my clients, because I don't want to take away from or put something, you know, I want to be we were taught, in Brainspotting, which is a wonderful concept. And I really embody that concept of like being the tail of the comet. But I can say that I do talk about it with my staff at my practice. And I think that, I've heard the concept talked about as well in Brainspotting and Brainspotting circles and Brainspotting trainings. And I know that it's being talked about more and more. And so I think for me, it's more of a way of showing up and then teaching my staff too and other professionals. And maybe one day I'll teach, beyond that. But right now I'm like, this is what I'm doing, and I'm happy to be here too. But teaching people how to come into relationship with that mindset and that framework, it's just a perspective shift. It's like part of it is no longer pointing the finger at the individuals, but really looking at the framework of we're in these oppressive systems, and what are these individuals who are suffering. I actually think, people who are struggling and showing that they're beautiful. This is amazing, because I think that they're shining the light on where our systems and our society has work to do in a lot of cases, in most cases. And I think that can be like a really radical idea, but I really do. That's how I feel. And that's how it actually started for me. I think that was one of your questions, Lindsay. How did this start for you? It was a framework shift that I will say it just kind of like dropped into my consciousness. And I think I was just doing my own work that prepared me for that. And it dropped into my consciousness like, oh my gosh, like it's not the individuals. We need to look here at what mental illness is telling us, right? And what we're conceptualizing and pathologizing as mental illness. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, that helps me understand, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's why Meredith and I kind of started this webinar series, because that's for both of us during our experiences. That's what came up for us too, right? In a different way, but individually. But it was, when you are the healer, and then when you are working on being healed, it's interesting. It's definitely it opens up. I don't even have the words for it, but it opens up a different knowing, I guess, of wow, I've been, you know, in therapy for 20 plus years, and I've been doing it this way, and I've learned this way, and then I chose to kind of go in a different way, and now I'm learning that there's so much more, and there is different ways to heal, and listening to our bodies, understanding our own histories, whether that be our histories within our family, within our culture, within our ancestors, whatever that means for you. And then, like you mentioned, and Meredith has said this, like, we are not the expert in our client. They are the expert in themselves. And so what they might feel about something might be very different than what we feel about something. And I think we're always taught, okay, you have to be unbiased when you're a therapist, but as a human being, that can be really hard. So to take this framework and knowing that your client is the expert in their life, I think kind of bridges that together for me.
Yeah. And that is the way that you're practicing decolonize. And we all have opportunities too. I was just talking to my staff about where are opportunities, right? I'm not coming here saying I'm doing this perfectly. I am practicing this perfectly. And we also have to acknowledge the system that we're in and what the rules currently are and how we're working on changing those. So I love that. It's beautifully said, Lindsay.
Yeah. And it does take us towards this second learning objective about how modalities like Brainspotting and CAP, and we already have kind of started this part of the conversation, that they offer more embodied relational approaches by centering the nervous system, nonverbal processing, and the client's innate wisdom, right? Because historically, I think right part of thank you, yeah, the unboxed part of this is that I know I have felt in the past that I have had to especially when I was like working with insurance or working in different settings, I felt very much like I had to put my clients into a certain box so that insurance would cover it, so that it would fit the diagnostic criteria that made sense. And that doesn't take into consideration the client's background, their culture, their lineage, generational trauma. Like there's so much that goes into like our psyche and just like the individual and how we arrive to, where we are. So I'll tell you, Brainspotting was the first training I did that I was like, it just like made sense to me all of a sudden. Like, oh my gosh, a modality that like it felt so right because it was really in alignment with what I felt to be true, as a therapist, that like, no, I'm not the expert. How can I pretend to like know? I can't pretend to know everything about everybody's everything. So
Yeah, too
right?
much
Yeah.
pressure.
Yes. And it sounds like that's some of your experience too with Brainspotting, Aimee, right?
Yeah, it's liberating. Like just I just took a breath, right? Like it's just too much pressure to come in. Like I know all of these, like I know everything. And there are certain situations like, we're gonna wanna get into our prefrontal cortex thinking brain and remember some stuff, right? Because we're still working in this kind of like medicalized model of mental health and we're existing within that system, but showing up differently. So we may need to slide back into that. But in most cases, like in 99.9% of how I'm presenting with my clients and as a healer and as a supervisor, I am just showing up in that partnership. And yeah, like I'm letting go of all this pressure that like I have to be the expert and have all this, information. And
Yeah.
it's a liberating framework shift.
Yeah, and I liked in the beginning when you kind of described yourself as intuitive, right? Because me and Meredith, we talk about that a lot, that even from the very beginning of, I don't know about you guys, but for myself, in the very beginning of starting grad school, right? And you're learning and you have your internships and you do your clinical hours and you feel sort of, especially when you graduate and you start and you're doing your hours and you're like, wait, that imposter syndrome comes up, right? And it's like, how am I supposed to kind of help? At least this is what happened for me, right? How am I supposed to be the one to help this individual or that individual when I'm 2 years in grad school and I've lived a certain life that maybe this person hasn't lived, XYZ, whatever. And um, I think that what I realized early on, but that wasn't fostered, was that a lot of the work that we do as therapists is intuitive work. And that's not, and maybe things have changed, I don't know, but I know for myself in grad school, that was not something that was talked about in my clinical classes. It was not something that was talked about with supervision. It was not something. And the reality is yes, we have our ethics, we have our frameworks, we understand the cognitive part of mental health, and it is important, and the scientific evidence-based approaches are important. They're there and they work for a reason. However, we have to use our discernment to know when it's appropriate for what client. And a lot of that is intuitive based. A lot of it is based on our own experiences. Um, and even though it's not supposed to be, right? You're not supposed to be biased and all of those things. And I think having conversations like this allows other individuals who are practicing under the therapeutic framework that it is okay to use that intuitiveness, because as therapists, we are trained to see, hear, look for things that others might not see, hear, or does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in school for forever ago at this point, but even thinking back, I went to a fabulous school that I think was kind of considering these concepts on some level, but this was all like pre any of this awareness. It was pre this consciousness. Like, this consciousness was coming into our field really strongly in this moment in time, and it wasn't then. Like, there might have been some early pieces of it, but when I was in school, I was just like, I want to practice mindfulness. I didn't know what it was. I didn't come from like a mentally healthy like family system or background, but I just knew that I was drawn to this concept of mindfulness. And so I took the course on mindfulness, and I was so disappointed. Like, and I hope the professor's not watching, but I mean, it was like read Dan Siegel's book on the mind, which is so heady. It is like, Dan Siegel is incredible. His books, his book was heady, and it was like, read this book and write papers and talk about it. And I'm like, what are we doing? And I didn't know how to say, I didn't have the ability, the embodiment, the language to be able to be like, this is not right. This doesn't feel right. And who am I to be like, what are we doing? Right? Like, I'm just a grad student in this class. Like, these are my professors. And, but it's so backwards. It's so backwards.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it kind of brings us a little bit to that third objective, which is, I'll read it here, and what has my brain going from what you just talked about: define cultural humility and understand how to practice it as an alternative to cultural competency. And I remember, my goal and my dream was always, I want to be a private practice clinician. That's what I wanted to do. I started in the schools because that was a way for me to make money while doing my hours and things like that. And slowly but surely, as I kind of shifted from schools to community work to working in a hospital, I realized that this feeling of burnout that I'm sure we've all experienced was overwhelming. And the way that it kind of came up for me was, nothing I'm doing is helping. The systems are against me, are against everybody. I'm trying to advocate. That's my job, especially being a social worker, right? That's part of my ethics, is to, number one, advocate, right? And then when you get pushback and advocacy, it's like, okay, what am I doing? And so that's kind of when, this was about 3 years ago, I started to question, it was probably 5 years ago, I started to question, like, do I even want to do this for a living? Because it felt misaligned with the reason I went into this field to begin with. And so I stepped away for a little bit, went back in 2020. I went back and started working in the hospitals, and I learned a lot. You can imagine that working in the ER in a hospital, you see so many different things. And again, 3 years in, it was, I'm hitting a wall. I'm being told how to treat certain people, or how to or here are the only resources that are available. And it got to the point where, for me personally, it started to affect my own mental health. Because what I now know is it wasn't aligned with me, and that was eating me up and all of those things. And so I took it upon myself to, like both of you, to kind of do deeper healing. And that's where, for me, ketamine-assisted therapy came in. And when I found my prescriber and my therapist, looking at the way that they treated me, it was like, whoa, like, this is so different from the 20 plus years I've been either a patient or a practitioner. And it was, it just felt, it was hard and messy and all those things, but it felt like I had the reins. Whereas some in the past, it was, your thoughts are wrong. You need to be thinking this way, or just replace that negative thought with that positive thought, or
Yeah.
well, it's because you have this diagnosis, and that was all that it was. And so when I finally experienced a different way, I'm like, this should be the way.
I'm like jumping up and down in my seat for you. It's so exciting. Like you just like gave a perfect personal example of like decolonizing mental health and how you experience that, right? Like that was so, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the reframe too, the from cultural competency to cultural humility, right? Because cultural competency was like a class we all had to take in grad school, right? Like that was the one class, like that was like the class.
Yeah.
But what is
Yeah.
that even, right? It doesn't, it really, doesn't, it doesn't
No,
really
it
exist.
doesn't, because it's like human competency.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
But what is competency and what does that imply? You know?
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, yes.
So I just wanted to say too, because I think I don't know who might stumble upon this podcast or just need to hear this and to hear that inspiration in your story, Lindsay, before we move on, that is kind of like really what I meant, or that is really what I meant when I was saying that we needed a framework shift, and that instead of pointing the finger at mental illness and the suffering individuals, if we continue to do that, there's this internalization that goes on for generations. Like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
And your story was like this beautiful, empowering story of you taking your power back and being like, no, it's not me. Like that burnout was a messenger. That experience, it was telling you something. And you were able to shift because of, a decolonized practice, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what brought Meredith and I together. We met through, when I was working at a company that was implementing ketamine-assisted therapy, and me and Meredith did trainings together, and we had these conversations so often. And that's kind of what kind of spearheaded this idea of bringing different professionals and practitioners on here to talk about the ways in which they're depathologizing and the ways in which they're doing things outside of the box.
Yeah. Yes, the work you're doing is so impactful. You guys are great. And thank you for hosting this, and thank you for creating this space and platform to talk about this. I had a question come up the other day in a staff meeting. Well, okay, what do we do? We can talk about it, but like sometimes talking is action, and doing your own healing and changing your consciousness, because you come into a relationship with somebody and you don't really have to do like just the consciousness shift is impactful. Like you are coming into relationship from a framework of, hey, these symptoms are messengers, or more of a decolonized framework. That has an impact. There's subtle language differences in the way that you're relating to people. There's subtle behavioral differences. It's just, all of this is really important. I think talking about this can sometimes lead people to feel powerless, helpless, like, oh my gosh, there's so many problems. How do I change the system?
Yeah.
But we already are. Yeah.
That's such a good point. And that was a big part of me leaving. It was like, I can't be part of a system that doesn't align with me. But then it felt like, am I abandoning am I abandoning a group of people where nobody else is going to, in my mind, it was like nobody else is going to see them or help them or pick up on things the way that I do. But I think that as a healer, whatever that looks like for you, you can't help somebody if you are in a mind frame where you are being pushed up against a wall. So even if you have all of the right intentions and you want to do things a certain way, you aren't going to be able to do what you need to do for that person if the environment you're working in isn't aligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, out there and in here.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. This is such a this is such an important, it's interesting. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go or kind of, but it really is an important conversation because last week the webinar we had was about spirituality in therapy. And, for a lot of therapists, that's like, no way, that has no place in the therapeutic container where we, I know I've experienced, especially doing ketamine-assisted therapy, unworldly, unexplainable, spiritual, universe type things that I'm lucky enough to have a therapist who believes in those things too, or at least supports my belief in those things. And there's yeah, I mean, we can talk about it forever. It's just there's different, and I'm looking at your different models here, and we're kind of getting into all of that, right? We're talking about systemic issues, culture, spirituality, and that that needs to be a part of the working through process, but we also have to look at the individual client and are they ready? Do they understand? Do they want to? Is it something that they can cognitively, work with? And so I think that's important too, because you are going to have some of those clients who might be resistant to this because maybe they have been in therapy for 10 years. You're one of five therapists they've seen and they're used to things a certain way. And so it's just all really interesting, and I can only hope that these conversations continue to expand and go wider and deeper into the systems. I don't know if they ever will, but that's the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with spirituality all the time to the extent that, yeah, you're right. I mean, like some clients really want it, some don't. I introduce it. I feel into my clients, like if they feel open. I have a colleague that will say, like, I'm feeling their nervous system. For me, it's like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm just feeling if there's an openness there, if this resonates, I invite them. But I bring it up when I feel like it could help deepen their practice. And I'm like, look, we don't have to go down that route if this doesn't resonate. Or how do you need to shift this into your language? But we don't need to be afraid. And that is one thing that the colonization of mental health teaches us, right? Like, be a blank slate. I went to school when it was still being taught to be a blank slate. And I can't do that. I like that's just cutting us off from all of our gifts. And you talked about your gifts, Lindsay, and like, do I not come back into this field where I know I have these gifts to help, certain people? And I really believe like it's just about being totally embodied with our clients and using self-disclosure, bringing concepts in when you get the sense intuitively, or you're like, I want to test if this will deepen their experience, and not being afraid to make a mistake. Like, how do you know? Yeah, like a newer counselors will ask, like, how do you know when to self-disclose? Like, I'm not sure that I really understand. How do you learn anything? Like, you do your best. I'll give you some tips and let's feel into this, but also we are going to learn from mistakes and we're going to learn how to repair that with our clients. And there's a lot of fear-based stuff out there, like a lot of fear-based like supervision and education of young counselors that like it's unethical and you're going to make it about you. And well, maybe I did for a second and I messed up. And how do I get back on track? And then I get a lot of like, well, how do I repair that? How do I fix it? And we forget that sometimes, not always, but sometimes we do have to repair that and address it directly. And sometimes like the best thing is to let it go, right? Because the client's already moved on. And then like by harping on it, you're just making it even more about you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And also, and it brings you back to the one thing that I still hold on to is that I think is important is you are where the client is, right? You start where the client is, and if you can go there. Even if you feel like you made a mistake or you messed up, you might think that that might be your internal thought process of your own experience, your own anxiety, your own whatever. But the reality
Your own
is
shit. Yeah.
did that actually affect my client in a negative way or did it not? And you having that relationship with that client are going to know that. And hopefully in building that relationship, you will know when or if it should be brought up. And hopefully, if not, you have colleagues or supervisors that will be able to talk to you and walk you through that. But me and Meredith talk about that a lot in self-disclosure. And I think for me, when I was working one-on-one with clients, it was something that allowed me to connect with them and for them to connect with me. For myself, my own therapist, it is so helpful for me when she self-discloses to an appropriate level. I mean, just yesterday, I'll give a little anecdote. I had therapy, and she has a 1.5-year-old, and she was homesick, and my therapist, we're virtual, and she went on, we were online, and she's like, I didn't want to cancel, but if you don't want her, she's sick, she just wants to sit on my lap. If you don't want her here, I'm like, of course, I don't care. Like that would be seen in some, you know, circles as like the most unprofessional thing ever. How do you have your 1.5-year-old on your lap when you're doing therapy? And to me, it was just like, of course, like this is like she was, when it was something that was just not even a thought. It was like, yeah, I don't care. When she was 6 months, postpartum, she had her baby with her. Like that is something that was comfortable for her and I. Maybe not would have been with another one of her clients, but she knew me well enough to know that likely it was okay, but still ask permission.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's important to like feel our clients out.
Yeah.
Yeah. You, Meredith.
Oh, there's
I
this
was going to ask
so many
about
great
culture
things.
humility.
Yeah. I wanted to, I think like full circle, and this was part of my psychedelic assisted therapy training, where it has you look at places and, oh, Lindsay, coming back to what you were saying too earlier about like these words that get some activation around them, like privilege, I think is one of the words that's, can be like,
Mm-hmm.
and it a social mapping exercise. It has you look at what areas in your life you have privilege and where maybe um, some identities have been marginalized. And it's really interesting, right? Because we all have that, maybe not all, but in some categories, there's privilege for most of us, and in some categories, there's marginalization for most of us. And it's a really, I think it's goes back to what I think that, when I think back to cultural competency class, they were trying to get at is like recognizing your own bias and how what you bring in with you as the therapist, can impact the session, and being aware of that. So I think that's a big part of this too, right? Is like being able to like own like, yeah, like I'm coming in as a, you know, white cis therapist, and like what that comes with, and
Mm-hmm.
that may create like a power imbalance in the session automatically just walking in. And so maybe it doesn't become part of the conversation, but I think even just like having that awareness is really a huge part of this.
It absolutely, and what that made me think of instantly is how do we help our clients feel safe to bring in, whatever they need to bring into the session. Like they're looking, right? Especially if you're working on these really deep levels with people where you're talking about like shifting their consciousness, embodiment, bringing in spirituality, really like deeply rooted, decolonized, looking at systems of oppression. As a white therapist, when we're presenting that way, which I'm half Mexican American, I'm half white, people don't know what I am a lot of the times. And so I have to think about how I'm presenting and how it leaves that ambiguity to people or with people, for people, and how do we create safety for clients to bring in their entire being, because they're looking like, what is your decor, like what is your, they're looking for evidence that, and they're feeling like evidence that you're safe. And so that's a really great point, that we can have, you know, certain books in our office, we can have pieces of like different culture, like we can have little cues, setting up your office with certain art. On my website, I've got like so much language about safe space for LGBTQ, for BIPOC, because people like need that, especially right now. Like, who's safe? Like, is this going to be okay? You know, and I can attest to that as a client too. Like, it took me a long time to start to bring into my own therapy spirituality and my Mexican lineage and the idea of ancestors, and like some of the traditions that really affected me growing up, some of the traditions that I wasn't even consciously aware of, but started to come up in my own processing. And you think about working with somebody who's marginalized, like, it's so important to just ensure that like felt sense of safety is there. And those are some little ways that you can just speak to that in your environment, working with people.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just recently, just this last week, saw on LinkedIn somebody talking about self-disclosure and when it's appropriate, when it's not. And then, you know, in this very heightened political world we live in right now, in all ways, you know, if a client asked you who you voted for or whatnot, is that something, and we don't have to get into that, but the point was like, when is that something that's appropriate to share, and when is that something that's not appropriate to share? Because for some people, who you voted for means you either support me or you don't. It's black and white. For other people, it's not. For some other people, it's in between. And so that what was the most interesting to me on that was not the opinion that I had, but it was reading the language that other helping professionals had. And it was kind of shocking to me to see this very unprofessional back and forth that I was seeing. And it made me feel really uncomfortable that there are clinicians out there that are, now we can have our own thoughts and feelings and beliefs because we all have experienced kind of what you're saying. You know, you being a Mexican American have had different experiences than me, who's a Jewish American, right? And who has a different history and a different lineage and a different you know, trauma and all of that. And I think the biggest thing that you just said is, regardless of, yes, it shapes who you are and it shapes maybe your frameworks and your take on things and how you approach things. But I think it's important to be in tune with that for yourself so that you, because number one, do no harm, right? Is who should be your client and who shouldn't be your client. And I think that's the answer to what this person was trying to get to, was if you don't feel that you can be a safe space for this client, then you shouldn't be seeing this client. And it's not about disclosing who you voted for, what you believe in. Do you believe this? Do you believe that? Is this person going to feel safe in my presence? And if I can't answer that with an absolute 100%, then I should be referring them to somebody else. And I think nobody got that. And that was like, that should have been it.
Yes, yes. And your clarity on that, and like how clear you said that. If I cannot be safe for this person to be the fullest expression of themselves, it's not just about like, are they going to heal their depressive symptoms? Like, are we going to do symptom reduction? That's a very colonized model. It's me, I'm working with clients who so that they can be the fullest expression of themselves. They can connect to their wholeness. They connect to all of them, like, right? And that fits a more decolonized model. If I cannot be safe for this person to be the fullest expression of themselves, then I should not be working with them.
Yeah. And people have a hard time admitting that because they think, well, I'm not biased. I can help anyone. And that's just not the truth. Everybody holds some sort of, whether intentional or not, or conscious or not. And I think you as a clinician have the kind of the responsibility to do that work and to really look deep within and where are your own boundaries, and you're allowed to have them, but they should not be put on a client.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah.
That's cultural humility right there, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's like humility, I think, period.
Mm-hmm. We're always learning. We're never competent. That phrase always, to be honest, it pissed me off. Like in grad school, sitting there and taking the diversity class, the competency class, and I was like one of the only minorities in my group. And I was like, what are we doing? Like it was more of a perspective taking, or, the, like, you're going to start 2 feet back. They're going to start up here and like, let's do this exercise. But it wasn't teaching people how to be open, how to think, how to embrace other cultures, how to, it's just to continually be learning. It was like, now you're competent. And that's what we have to remember. Humility resonates with me so much more deeply and authentically, that we're always learning. Just because I grew up Latina in this way in my own experience doesn't mean that if I get a Latino client that I know, because I don't, and I usually don't, like their experience is going to be different. Or a Black client or an Asian person, like, yeah, we're marginalized people, or working with a white client, like a Jewish client, like this, it's just being open. I'm not competent. I'm open. And that's humility, I think, is competency. It's just a different way of, like, we're never done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Wow. I can't believe that an hour just went by. This was such a wonderful conversation, and I think a really, really, really important one. And we've touched on it in our previous webinars, but we never really went this deep with it. And I think this is so important to really, not only just to clinicians, but to people seeking help, that there are therapists out there, there are people out there who are safe and who are willing to work with you where you are.
Yes, and therapy can look different. Like that's the great place to end. If you think therapy looks a certain way and it felt just like it didn't show up enough for you, like you didn't get enough from it, you still feel this internalized, like there's something wrong with me, and look different. And Brainspotting and CAP are two models that can easily be practiced in a very decolonized way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Aimee, that's actually like the message I got as soon as I went to your website. That was like the message, right? And so maybe you can share with folks how they can connect with you and your practice, and what's the best way for people to find you.
Yeah. So we have a free 15-minute consultation button on my website. On our website, it's mindfulsprings.com, MINDFUL Springs, SPRINGS. And they can sign up for a 15-minute consultation, and that's what they're going to get. Like that is what we do. We're a very specialized practice in decolonized, non-traditional practices. So feel free to ask more questions about it. Let us know if that's exactly what you're looking for. And we have locations in Colorado, Seattle, and Northfield, Illinois, which is just outside of the Chicago area. That's my hometown, Chicago. So
I knew I heard a Chicago accent.
Yeah. I still have a little residual, I think.